Thank you for joining us for another Mentors Moment where we like to talk to those effectively helping tomorrow's youth today. My name is Tish, and this month we are going to be speaking with Miss Margarita. It's going to be a director's tips on executing a plan. So everybody welcome Margarita. You guys are going to love her. She's, I'm actually going to let her tell you what she does.
Hey, Tish. Coming from my car because us directors are so busy. So what do I do? It's funny. A lot of people are confused by what I do often when I share my title, but what I do basically is oversee federally funded programs. So what that means is that the schools that I work with and that we have intervention programs in receive federal funding, and basically I oversee all of that, everything from hiring staff to training staff to overseeing $1 million plus budgets to planning for training and development and planning for new program acquisition and new contracts. And
Wow.
It's a lot. So it's a lot of layers to what I do. But what I love about it is that I do a lot of different aspects. So I get to have my hands in all of it, which is great.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, now you see with her layers and layers of what she's involved in, why I had to talk to her about planning, because a lot of us have great ideas and we just don't know how to get started or to put those ideas out into the world and really, really make a fundamental difference. So are you ready to talk?
I am.
All right. Why did you decide to work with kids? Why this field?
So it's interesting, right? I went to an Ivy League college, and I feel like when I was there and started to think about what I wanted to do for the rest of my life,
right?
I was struggling a little bit, and I always have geared towards more of the sociological, kind of hands-on, working with people. And I happened to work at Columbia University's preschool, and it was very random. Super random, right? I got my work study job. Sounded really cool to work with young, small little children. Yeah. And it was close to campus. And a lot of the professors, children went to this preschool. And I thought, well, how cool. Like, I'll work with kids. How hard could that be? And actually what ended up happening, there was lots of 3 and 4-year-olds. And I fell in love. I fell in love with kids. I fell in love with the curiosity. I fell in love with education. We learned in my work, I learned a lot. Of course, it was a university-based preschool, so they were very much about research. And so I kind of just fell in love with like all that went into educating these small kids.
Nice.
And I decided to go into education. And the second layer, what? Like, I actually want to give back to public education.
Yes.
Not only did I have this great experience in this work study job, but I felt this almost obligation to give back to public schools and public school students who, like me, didn't know a lot about the world at the time and maybe needed more opportunities and more chances. And so for me, it was just the combination of like this new passion and this desire to give back to my community and the public school world really kind of blended. And that was where I found my calling, I felt like, at the time.
Wow, that's beautiful. How do you recognize a need to fill? Do you know, like, how do you even get to the vision part?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because there's vision, I think, and then there's sort of practicality in terms of problem solving.
Okay.
And I think in the work that I do, they kind of go hand in hand. So for me, in what I do, my vision is always like just set high standards, right? So that includes for me having high quality staff, having high quality training, having like the best curriculum that we can be implementing. But then there's just the reality that like day to day, week to week, month to month, things happen. For example, COVID, right?
Yeah.
So here we were like running our programs in schools. My vision was to complete an X certain kind of way. And then COVID hit. So my vision had to pivot and shift really fast, right? So all of a sudden, within a week or 2 weeks, I had to figure out how to take the vision that we had for this on-site, regular program.
Right.
And how do we then take that and make it work for this virtual environment?
Right.
And so for me as a director, vision has to always be infused with hands-on, quick problem solving.
Okay.
Because on any given day, any given week, you never know what you're going to confront. It could be something as large as a closure based on like COVID, or it could be that a teacher quits and then you have to like set a new plan for a certain site, or it could just be that, funding changes and you need to like adapt your program plan. So I think for me, it's always about vision versus reality and how to kind of fuse the two of those things.
So I guess what I'm hearing you say is, so you have the vision, but like the practicality of how you can implement it into every day and to make sure that it's adaptable. So
Exactly.
if a problem arises, I mean, does that look like a big group think tank, or like how do you come up with the steps to? Okay,
well, I think as a director, there's a lot of onus on you at the end of the day. So sometimes I'm on a call and I want to come to the call, let's say, as far as my team, and I want to ask, like, fix it for me, right? Like, sometimes you don't have an answer, but usually the question is, well, what do you think? How would you fix it? What do you want to do? And so I always have to process myself, and I've kind of learned to quickly figure out solutions, right? I take what I have, and I know for what I do, it has a lot to do with staff, right?
Okay.
So I take the staff that I have and the experience that I know is amongst the people on my team, and I start to figure out, well, so-and-so can do this, so-and-so I know can do this well. So how do I kind of restructure taking everybody's skill set and making sure that I'm adapting everyone's skill set to the change, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important to really kind of know your team and know how to best adapt your people to the needs at hand.
Wow.
And that's super important. And I would add to that, I think as a director, as a manager, you have to have good rapport with your staff, right? Because I have to be able to then contact my staff and say, hey, this is what's going on. Here's what I think. I need you to do X, Y, Z, or think about being able to do X, Y, Z, and know that they have confidence in me that it's going to work.
Wow.
Right. So there's this whole like bit of confidence and understanding that has to happen in order for any kind of change to work. And I work really hard to build good relationships with the people I work with so that they trust that when I bring them something, they know that I have their back and they know that it's a workable solution.
Oh man, that's so valuable. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I did the Zoom with kids, and we were talking about leadership, following and leading, right? And one of the things that some of the kids who considered themselves more so follower, I was like, well, what kind of leader do you follow then? They were like, well, we have to be able to trust said leader. Otherwise we won't follow. And so that's like from 7 to 14-year-olds to even adults. If you don't trust, even if I was going to go marriage wise, if I don't trust like where my husband's head is, I can't follow.
Exactly. It's huge.
So, yeah.
Because I can feel it. That's the interesting thing, right? Like I can feel when someone trusts what I'm saying and doing, and I've even had people share with me like, thank you. Like you're so XYZ, right? Because in the end, I always say this, right? People will be able to, they'll be able to take a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos, but if there's no trust, it's never going to work, right?
Wow.
So that's huge. And that's really at the core of leading people and changing and being able to oversee things is that trust factor.
Gotcha. Well, what tools do you use to help others see your vision imagined?
It's a good question. I think it's part of that is just ongoing, right? Like I believe heavily in training, staff development, right? So you can say, let's say, for example, we start a school year and it's August, and I can meeting with staff and I can share my message and I can share my vision one time. But the difference between doing that and every month at our staff meetings, infusing that vision in an ongoing way and making sure that they see, not only did they hear me say that, but they see it in everything that I do. They see it in my emails. They see it in my staff development. They see it in the meetings that I oversee. They see it in the support that I provide them. So I feel like vision is not a one-time thing.
Right.
Vision is, how do you own it, and how do you constantly take the time and energy to infuse that vision in every single thing that you do?
Wow.
And for me, it's like quality and an intense, almost dedication to quality is a big part of what I do, because whether it's the way that I write my emails, the way that I address people, the way that I thank people, the way that I set agendas, every single thing that I do, I see as a part of my vision. So it's not just sharing some little speech or some little like moment, like, guys, here's what I want you to do. It's everything that I do speaks to that same quality, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So for me, it's about setting a standard and then holding myself to it, which allows me to hold everybody else to it.
Wow, I love that. And it seems like a standard, yeah, and then the consistency of it.
Absolutely.
So if I'm hearing you right, because like my mind is like, if I'm hearing you right, like the whole point of a plan is you have the end vision and then it's walking it out daily, right?
Execution. Because you could have a million plans, but the execution is everything, right? So, and execution is the hardest part. I mean, you know what? I'll take that back. I think for a lot of us, vision is hard too, right? Because you can have a lot of ideas and a lot of passion, but honing in is not always easy. But I'll say they're equal. Let's say that they're at least equal as far as like your vision and the execution, because the execution takes a lot of energy too. Sometimes it's just planning a meeting. How do you set up the tables? How do you set up the speaker? What time do you have the speaker come in? At what point? I mean, for me, it's a lot of detail, right? Okay. Because I'm a detailed oriented person. But I think the devil's in the detail, so as they say, because sometimes it's just how much time you spend on a topic. Definitely execution goes hand in hand with that.
Okay. So here's a good question. And this is, I mean, I think even at what stage do you assemble a team to help you execute the plan? So when you get the funds, when you're just starting out, like when do you bring in the arsenal?
Yeah, I mean, it shifts, right? So ideally it's when you get your funding. Okay. But for us, I'll give you the example, because our work is contract based. We need to have a signed off contract from a school district before we can make any kind of moves, right? We can't hire anyone. We can't launch a program until we actually have a contract. So it starts with that contract. And then beyond that, I think it's also developing the program itself. So it takes like the folks in leadership to say, here's the funding we have, here's the schools that we have, and what's going to work for those schools. And not the same cookie cutter response doesn't work the same way everywhere. So I'll give you an example. Here in Florida, I oversee directly 3 programs in South Florida. But the management structure is a little bit different for all 3 of them. And part of it is because you take your client and the needs of that client, you take the experience within that market, and you take the funding, obviously, and then you set a plan around that. And so to answer your question, I think the minute that I can start planning is the minute that I know it's like, okay, all hands on deck, go. And then I take all the parameters that I have and I try to strategize like what's the best logical plan for that situation.
Okay, so so for instance, let's say entrepreneur. Okay, we'll equate it to that real quick. Your first yes. Once you get that yes, once you get that bird in the bush, get your team assembled. Like maybe plant seeds beforehand, but don't strike until you actually. Is that what you say?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think especially when you're not. I mean, imagine I'm working company based, right? So there's budgets and there's infrastructure and there's overhead already set up.
Right.
So if you want to speak, or if we're going to talk about entrepreneurs, I mean, gosh, for sure you have to have like a solid, here's the funding, right?
Yeah.
Here's what I'm going after, because if you don't have that, how do you hire? How do you purchase equipment? How do you know, you can do some of that. I mean, I think there's a lot of groundwork that you can do just to prepare yourself. But I think it's always super important that you have the clients in place before you spend X amount of dollars, right?
Yeah, I think another thing that's I would say I equally along with this line is that some people say, well, I can't do it until I have X, Y, and Z. And like, no, you can go after it. I have it lined up first.
Yeah.
Don't, you know, so.
Yeah, I would disagree with you can't do anything. I mean, you have to do some stuff. And I think networking is huge. So for example, I know you and I have talked about that.
Yeah.
Right. So networking, right? Like you don't have to spend money on that. So I mean, my daughter, who's now about to be a senior in college, she's like a networking expert. I think her generation has learned this more than even mine.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think if you plant seeds, it costs you nothing to have conversations. It costs you nothing to scout out. It costs you nothing to investigate different angles. I'm like a supreme, like plan A, B, C, D kind of person. So I always kind of like to set up at least a couple of options. And if you do that through conversation, you're not spending any money, right?
Right.
But you are saying like, I'm planting seeds, and those seeds, when I'm ready to like hit go, those seeds are already there. And so I'm a huge proponent of networking and planting seeds, because you definitely have to have some foundation before you can hit go.
Yes.
100%.
Oh man, that's so good. Let's see. Okay. In what way do you determine the assets needed for a plan?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that is, what does the contract require, or what does the work require, or the job, whatever you want to call it. So it starts there, and then your budget. I mean, you have to set a budget. You can't, you can't go willy-nilly.
Right.
Because willy-nilly is problematic. You know, so I think it's a matter of understanding the project and the scope of the work and the project itself, and then setting a budget, whatever that is, whether it's like, you know what, it's bare bones right now and I only have $1,000 to get something accomplished. Well, that matters, because you know that not everybody's going to pay you that, right, or not everybody is going to accept that. And so I think having the scope and setting a budget is the foundation for everything.
Nice. Let's see. Okay. What advice would you give to someone in the starting stages of a vision?
I mean, I'd say like in the starting stages, go all out, you know?
Yeah.
I think when you're having your vision, the vision part.
Okay.
And you know, I was listening to something actually yesterday, part of my self-care Sunday. I was doing my virtual church, right? Which I don't do every Sunday because I don't always have time. But my virtual church service yesterday was all about vision, actually. And I thought it was interesting because I was very aligned with what the message was. And it was all about Pinocchio, which was interesting. Like, you know, kind of wishing on a dream, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that I think that when you're at the vision stage, go all out. Like when you're sitting and dreaming and envisioning, I mean, no holds barred. Don't think about the money. Dream-based, like large, heartfelt, like all of that, right? Dream big, dream huge, dream like beyond the stars.
Yeah.
And then when you are ready to execute, that's when you start to pull back to reality, because then you start to have baby steps.
Okay.
Right?
So
and then you start to think about, you kind of go big and then pull back. And then you go back out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense.
But dream big. I mean, your vision should be huge and massive. And here's the part of the message I mentioned, you know, the service yesterday. It was almost like, even if it's something you've never seen before, believe that you can do it, right? Mm-hmm. Believe that what you think is possible is actually possible. Mm-hmm. And then scale back.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, in the belief part, we're like that, like, man, you're setting us up and you don't even know it.
I love it.
How would you encourage someone in the face of doubt?
Gosh, I mean, I have doubt on a daily basis. Like literally, I sometimes I wake up and I'm like, God, can I do this today? But when COVID hit and I was asked, I had to furlough 2 managers. So it's just me overseeing everything here in Florida. And I was asked to like quickly pivot into this remote teaching environment. I had to encourage my staff, train my staff, build a new program, build new training. And so I don't know. I think it starts with taking deep breaths. I'm going to be honest. Like sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
I got to just like sit down. I mean, it sounds super simple,
Yeah.
but sometimes I'm overwhelmed and I just have to like take some breaths, take a moment, almost like breathe and meditate my way through it. And one of my mottos is like any and everything is possible, right? And so I kind of live my life that way. Like, so in a moment it feels overwhelming and dreadful and crazy and awful and all these things. But in my heart, I know that I can do anything. And so I start with, okay, breathe through it. Take a breath, take a moment, meditate, all these things that are very spiritual. And then quickly I'm like, you can do it. You've done so much. You've raised 2 children.
Right.
You've done all these things. Like, you got this. So then I have to turn around and be my own little cheerleader.
Yes.
Right. But it's okay to be overwhelmed. It's really okay to think that like, holy cow, I don't know what I'm going to do. So sit in that moment for a moment and like be okay with that.
Yeah.
But don't let yourself stay there. Right. So very quickly get real spiritual, real quick, and get yourself out of it. And know that if God moved mountains, so can you.
Oh,
right?
Man. Mm-hmm.
So get yourself out of that and then get into your toolbox, like super quick, right? Like, I know this person, I know this resource, I know how to do this, and then kind of like positively move yourself back into a space of accomplishment and know that we all know this for ourselves. Like, my gosh, you can say like, what are you doing every day? You're raising 2 beautiful boys. You're, heading a household. You're doing all these things. And I think we have to remind ourselves that powerhouses that we are.
Right.
So when we feel overwhelmed and like we can't do something, yeah, you can. Just remind yourself, right?
Yes. Man, good gracious, girl. I wasn't expecting all this. I'm glad I'm videotaping, let me tell you. Okay. How do you handle unplanned personnel changes? And I think you actually touched base on this.
I did.
I mean,
it happens all the time. I mean, any work that you do is always going to come with that. And I think it's exponential, right? Like percentage wise, like the more people you work with, the more likely you're going to have to deal with people quitting and all sorts of things, right? And what I have found in my decades plus experience professionally, it never happens at a good time. Yeah. It's always the worst time. It's kind of like always the worst client that it happens with, the one that's already teetering on the edge, right? It's never like, oh, they quit when it's like the summer, in our case that we deal with schools, right? It's always like mid-program, worst client that's already questioning whether they should work with you. It's just like Murphy's Law, I feel like, when it comes to staff. But I do think it starts with like vetting people the best that you can, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I found is like really vet people, right? Like call their references. I mean, there's always that saying that like references are always going to be good. Yeah, that's true. But like vet them anyway. You get a gut feeling about people the more you kind of like dig into them. And the biggest thing I think I've learned with staff is like trust your gut, right? Like if I have to look back in the past years when I was more of a novice manager and I would feel like I knew that was like a tricky hire or like I was questionable about that person and I always let it drag out for really long. In hindsight, it's like, man, I wish I would have listened to myself, right?
Right.
But in general, I think like the other side to that is when things do happen and someone does quit or you are scrambling in a staffing situation, I've also learned to trust the expertise around you. People are more capable than you think. Yeah. And so sometimes like I think one of my challenges has been delegating, because I have a certain standard and I kind of want to do it all myself, because I know then I'll hit that mark, right? And I've had to really learn to delegate and trust that the people around me know my vision and they're going to execute really strongly too. And so I would say, like, in a crisis, in a situation, in a change, in any dynamic that I'm in, I'm learning more and more to trust that the people around me know what I need and want, and they're going to help me to execute it.
Wow.
And so give more responsibility to those people, right? So someone who's maybe just a teacher, promote them to a manager, because they know what you desire. They know what ground you're setting for the team, right? And so trust in that, and don't be so hesitant to delegate to people.
And what is the biggest lesson a child taught you?
Well, I've learned a lot of lessons from kids. I would say, though, my own children have taught me the biggest lessons, right? And I want to say my older daughter, right? Okay. So I'll give you that lesson in a nutshell. Was, for our children, we always think we know what's best for them. We always think we kind of can map it out and figure it out for them. And I know here in Miami, like, right, finding the right school, like once they get to middle school and high school, there's a lot of magnet programs, and there's not just your local school, but you can kind of pick between other options. And when my daughter was graduating elementary, there was a couple of options for her. And one of them was like this new arts school, right? It was an arts charter school. And for me, I grew up in New York with like Fame and like that whole Fame, I'm gonna live forever, right? So like I found out about that school and I was like, oh my God, that's my dream. Holy cow, like you're gonna go to this art school. And I pictured the kids dancing in the hallways, and I pictured but that was my dream, right? Like, and I remember we'd gone through the whole process. She'd done like the applications for like that school, and there was another school called Young Women's Preparatory that was much more like academic, and they wore a uniform. And I remember we were like days away from the decision, right? And we were driving one day and we were talking about it, and she's like, Mom, I know that's your dream, but this is mine. And I want to go to Young Women's Prep, and like, that's my decision. And it was such a sobering moment for me. I was like, you know what? Every individual walking this earth, whether they're a child, an adult, whatever, has their own vision for themselves.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter that I was her mom and I was an educator and I thought I knew best and all these things. She was quick to like remind me that she had her own vision for herself. Yeah. Even though she was only like, 10 at the time? I mean, she was 10 or 11. I mean, pre-middle school. And I just remember looking at her and I was like, really humbly, like, okay.
Hell, you say
all right. And it was all about vision, that. And be okay when someone else tells you that that's what their vision is. Back off. Like, I don't own her. Like, I might have birthed her. Like, right. I don't own her decisions. And so that was super sobering for me.
Yeah. Man, that's such a good one. All right. Parents, that's a tuck away for myself.
Yeah, we don't own our children. We birthed them, but we don't own them.
Yeah. Well, I want to just say thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure learning from you, because that's what I did. And I'm hoping that's what the YouTube people are going to do too.
I don't know. I'm an educator at heart, but I'd never say that I have
Right.
I hope that someone gained something out of this today.
I guarantee you someone, even if that someone's me, I did. Like, I'm some people.
You are.
All right. Well, are there ways that they can support you, or did you want to be followed, or you have
just constantly busy? But they can follow me on IG, Margarita Mesa 27.
Margarita Mesa.
Why not? I mean, follow me on IG, and when I post, follow me on there for now.
Okay. All right, so I will link that below. Thank you so much again. Next month, guys, is going to be, we're going to be talking about honor with a vet. So make sure you stay tuned next month.
Yay.
And have a good one.
Thank you.